Hi everyone, Ryan Miles from NineTailed Gaming here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about my top 5 cards in the metagame after the release of the Advent of the Demon King. I think that the Advent of the Demon King is bringing a lot of interesting and competitive things to the competitive scene for Force of Will. We're seeing a lot of standalone cards that just kind of become staples for the color that they're in. You think back to cards like Space-Time Anomaly, cards like Severing Winds, cards like Lightning Strike. We have a lot of cards that just on their own are powerful and will see play in decks based on the color that those decks want to be. I'm really excited for it, so without further ado, these are my top 5 cards for the metagame post-Advent of the Demon King. So first up, we have the NineTailed Fox. Now, the NineTailed Fox hasn't seen a lot of play since Worlds, which was just over 2 months ago, but I think with some of the cards that are coming out in the Advent of the Demon King, and for some other reasons, the Fox is going to see a lot more play. So what makes this card so powerful, right? Why is it my number 1 card for the Advent of the Demon King? Well, first up, it doesn't cost any will to use. You get to sacrifice 2 Resonators and a Killing Stone at instant speed, and you get to create a Chimera from either your deck or outside of the game, and it doesn't cost you any will to do it. So you can do it on your opponent's turn, even when you're tapped out, and it's very difficult for them to play around that kind of thing when you're not representing will, and you just always have this option available to you, and I think it's a very powerful effect. Next up, this card generates free resources because the green and black creature that you're sacrificing usually replace themselves when you brought them into the field or replace themselves when they die. You're able to create this Chimera, and then essentially the 2 cards you used to make it were free, right? So the ability to generate free resources when not a lot of other decks are doing that right now, I think is going to be extremely good, and it'll be hard to stop. And last but not least, I think that there's little to no counterplay that exists for this card. There's nothing really that stops activated abilities from happening at all. The only things in the entire game that we have are in Wanderer, and that's Glimpse of Kaguya, and then Kaguya 3.0 as she's called. So really the only thing you can do to stop the Chimera from entering the field is either to use Dawn of the Earth or have a Neo Barrier, right? You have to have a Neo Barrier, but then you need to have 8 stones. And because the NineTailed Fox is able to aggressively generate advantage using its abilities to generate free resources, it's very difficult to stay ahead long enough to get 8 stones for a Neo Barrier, or to be able to cast a Dawn of the Earth and have it resolve, right, when there's cards like Fair Spell and Severing Winds in the meta. So I think the NineTailed Fox is incredibly strong, and will probably be one of the most played cards in the metagame once this new set comes out. So next up, we have Demonic Dead. So what makes Demonic Dead so good is for my number 2 pick. Well, first of all, it doesn't cost any will. And what I mean by that is, yeah, it costs 2 will to play the card, but once it's in your graveyard, now you're able to use a separate resource from the normal resource to be able to use its effect. So you're able to pay 500 life and use your life total as a resource instead of using your will. So your will is freed up to do other things like counter Dawn of the Earth or jack off a little bit. So when you have that kind of freedom to do things, you get a lot more out of your game than any other deck will do, right? So next up, this card is able to generate free resources, and it's able to do it a lot. Because this effect isn't once per turn, you can revive your Demonic Dead, sacrifice it for an ability like Guinevere if you're in Wanderer, or if you're in New Frontiers, you can use it for an effect like the Fox, the NineTailed Fox. And then you can sacrifice it for a Chimera, and then make more Chimeras, right? I think that's really good overall. Just the fact that you're able to create cards without actually having to play cards lets you play around Severing Winds. I think that's good overall. And last but not least, there's little to no counterplay. So if you think about cards that interact with the graveyard, right? You've got Barrier Seal, you've got Dark Alice, you've got Rezard, and again, you've got potentially Dawn of the Earth, which can stop this from coming into the field. Demonic Dead just kind of beats half of those. So if you play Dark Alice, Demonic Dead chases using its paying 500 life ability at instant speed, comes on in the field, Dark Alice gets cucked. Rezard, you can get into a life total war, so Rezard kind of beats it. Barrier Seal, you can respond to Barrier Seal being on the chase to get at least 1 more activation out of it before Barrier Seal resolves and then is actually able to kill your Demonic Dead. And then the last one I said was Dawn of the Earth, and Dawn of the Earth does absolutely nothing because when you activate Demonic Dead to return it to the field, they can play Dawn of the Earth, and then you can chase with Demonic Dead, and then he's on the field. It doesn't matter. It happened before Dawn of the Earth went off. So that's why I think Demonic Dead is probably the number 2 card in the entire format once Advent of the Demon King comes out. And at number 3, we have Gryphon, Racing Across Darkness. So yes, I do say here that it doesn't cost any will, but let me explain. This card has a converted mana cost of 6, but I think there are a lot of effective ways to cheat it out for cheaper than that. The first one that comes to mind, for example, is Dark Revolution. Now, that costs 4 mana, but it's less than 6, and because you're getting 2 stones back, it really only costs 2 mana. And a 2 mana 12/12 flyer is almost as good as back in the Gwyber days when we had 1 mana 12/12 flyers. Outside of Dark Revolution, for example, you've got Reincarnation, which is 3 mana red. You sacrifice creatures off your board, and then you reveal cards from the top of your deck, and any resonators you see you put into play. So that costs 3 mana, and will put this guy into play. And then, of course, because you call 2 stones, you can cheat it in for only 1 mana. And then there's also the NineTailed Fox, which allows you to cheat it in for 0 mana, and then you generate 2 stones. So once again, you're generating free resources. I think that being able to generate resources for absolutely nothing is incredibly powerful right now after the advent of the Demon King. I think it's going to define a lot of the top decks in the game. So any deck playing Gryphon and able to cheat it out for 0 mana is probably going to be very, very good. And again, we have little to no counterplay. So if Gryphon has a little bit more than the other cards in this list that I've talked about. You do have cards like Gale Force, you have Keys' Call to stop the enter ability, but at the end of the day, you need to stop the enter ability and stop the 12/12 flyer that's going to beat you in the face. So I think that while counterplay options exist, it's always 2 cards for 1, right? You never really stop Gryphon from hitting the board and also being a big resonator threat, so I would say that there's very little counterplay that actually exists for this card. So number 4 on this list, gonna mix it up a little bit here and do a ruler this time. It is Lilius Petal, Agent of Salvation. Now, there are not a lot of rulers in the game that can J-activate for 0, you know, and most of them have been very, very strong. You think of, like, I'm trying to think what rulers J-activate for 0, right? It's like absolutely broken ones, like Dark Alice got 2nd place at Nationals last year, ended up only losing to Fox, right? So that meta was kind of just all about rulers that J-activate for 0. And speaking of rulers that J-activate for 0, you've also got Kaguya 4, you know, one of the best control rulers of the complete format right now. And I think that's it. So yeah, it doesn't cost any will to flip, which means that you're able to just start using his J-ruler side ability almost immediately. Next up, this card is able to generate free resources. As you can see, it has Energize printed on it, and that just means that at the start of the game, you get a free will, right? We've only had that mechanic in the game for about a block and a half now, and there are 2 blocks in the game that did not have Energize. So there are more rulers that don't have Energize than do have Energize. So it's definitely in your favor to play a ruler that can generate free resources like Lilius Petal, Agent of Salvation. And last but not least, there's little to no counterplay. There's nothing in the game that stops you from energizing, and there's nothing in the game that stops you from judgmenting right now, right? We used to have Barrier of Shadows, but that rotated, so there's really no counterplay for calling a stone every turn or J-activating. So little to no counterplay. I think it's going to be one of the best cards in the game. And number 5, the last card on this list, is going to be the Killing Stone. So first of all, this card I think is really, really good because it doesn't cost any will, right? You can play it turn 1 for free. Like it doesn't, you don't have to pay, like you don't even have to call a stone and then you get this card. Well, you have to call a stone and then you get this card, right? But you don't have to call a stone first, right? You know, you see what the order is? It's like a simultaneous timing thing. So I think the Killing Stone is very good because again, when you don't use will to do something, you're really just creating an advantage for yourself. Next up, it generates free resources, right? It doesn't cost anything for this card to produce will, and I think that's incredibly strong. In addition, anytime it goes to the graveyard, right, so for whatever reason, if your opponent kills your stone, for example, you're able to deal 100 damage and gain 100 life. And it's not even dealing damage, I apologize. Your opponent loses 100 life. So right now in the meta, we're seeing a lot of tree decks and things like that, so that little bit of extra burn can really help you get that extra mile against those style of decks. So that ability just tacked on top of being able to generate will for free, I think is incredibly strong. And last but not least, there's little to no counterplay. I think the only 2 cards right now that really affect this are Captain Hook and Baroost. And Captain Hook is actually banned in like most regions that have a brain, so I think you're going to get a lot of value out of your Killing Stone in your American Grand Prix, and I think it's the number 5 card in the game once the new set comes out. And I do want to give an honorable mention here real quick to one card. I wanted to put up my top 5 list, but I really just couldn't justify it being better than anything else, and that will be Priscia, the Maiden in Flame. And as you can see here, this card unfortunately costs will, which is the primary reason it didn't make the list. Anytime you have to spend resources to do something, it's strictly worse than not spending resources. So that's why it's an honorable mention slot. It does cost 2 mana to deactivate, and then it does a bunch of stuff, but if you have to pay 2 mana, does it even matter? Next up, you're not really generating free resources with this card, you're recycling resources, right? So in order to pull stones off the top of your deck, you have to already have a stone in play. That is strictly worse than just putting 2 stones into play for absolutely no reason. So a little bit worse than some of the cards on my top 5, but still very powerful nonetheless, compared to cards that don't do either. And of course, there is little to no counterplay, can't change that. Yes, you can block it, but it's flying, and it's very difficult to get around the other cards in the deck, like Lightning Strike and Mariabella and Sylvia, just making sure that your blockers aren't a problem. And of course, any way to stop the damage, like Melfier Amaras's Foresight, is cancelled by Fair Spell, and Prescia is, of course, a green ruler. So that's why she's in my honorable mention slot. I think she is very strong, and if you're not playing the first 5 cards, I think you're probably playing this card. So that's my top 5 list, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're watching, make sure to go ahead and take a like and subscribe down there. And if you work for Force of Will, fix your goddamn game.